expansions. If you've played a lot of Stellaris, you'll find out that a lot of them are rather cool. We get them fairly frequently, and hey, there appears to be another one on the horizon pretty much at any time. But the next one, in this particular case, Federations, is not coming out for another while, at least not until early 2020. So instead, December is here, and normally I get an expansion, but that's not the case, clearly. So I'm going to just design one of my own, with Blackjack and hookers. Actually, not that last one. I believe those are already available in the hyper entertainment centers, which is interesting. Now, Daniel, if you're watching this, feel free to take notes, and anything that you see in this particular video, it's on the house. Just go nuts, go ham, be inspired. Now, I want to preface this that I am not in any way a game designer, but I do work in large-scale entertainment projects for a living, and I've played a few hours of this game, so I may as well. Anyway, first we're going to need to define what Stellaris is at its core, what has already been changed since launch, and more importantly, what can already be improved on. Now, thanks to this Dev Diary 149, which was posted back in May of 2019, we have a good overview of what the game is at its core. A series of stacked modifiers that govern the calculation of nearly everything that goes on your screen, at least within your empire. And of course, every single other empire also has one of these delightful little networks. Now, from the ship design to jobs to traits, it's a surprisingly complex system behind everything, including starbases. All empire-related modifiers are listed on this particular chart. Now, using this chart, we can map out where most of the work has been done since launch. First of all, Leviathans. It affected mostly fleet action with giant beasties in space, and you can get modifiers from that. Hey, you want to get a little bit more fleet power? Kill that worm over there, and you will get yourself some more armor on your ships, or energy and stuff like that. Hey, you can even get a Drake of your own. Then Utopia dealt mostly with megastructures, which were first introduced back then, at least as buildables. A lot of civics, new species and traditions, as well as species traits and rules behind species, what they are actually allowed to do within your empire. Then we had Synthetic Dawn, which once again focused a lot on civics and species, adding the machine worlds and machines themselves as an authority, which is pretty cool. A lot of good flavor there. And of course, my personal favorite, one that I didn't play for a long time, Rogue Servitors. Pretty nice. Then there was Apocalypse, yet another fleet action and design focused expansion with a dash of civics, and a patch which completely changed how expansion works through starbases and stuff like that. All the FTLs were gone and we only have hyperdrive. This was the big 2.0 patch back in the day. Pretty exciting by itself, but a little bit polarizing to some people. Then there was the S-tier expansion, at least for me, at least the cheapest one of the bunch. Distant Stars. It's very unique as it doesn't really fit on this chart, as it mostly focuses on anomalies. But I guess one could argue that because it focuses mostly on galactic objects, we're just gonna put it there because there's modifiers for said galactic objects. Then there was Megacorp, again, civics, but also a little bit on megastructures, planets, traditions, and in this particular case, also the Le Guin patch, which just did that massive overhaul of jobs, pops, and building systems. So we'll throw that one in there for a good measure as well. Ancient Relics, which was mostly about relics, the relic system and the new planet type, so I thought that was fairly straightforward. And then we'll just throw in lithoids, as it's fairly unique when it comes to the species packs, and it touches on traits and species as well, so I'm just gonna throw that in there for good measure. Now, as you can see, there is quite a lot of subsystems that have been fiddled with over time. Some of them have been added completely wholesale, brand new. Relics, for instance, come to mind here, and also, of course, those megastructures. And I am not really interested in adding new systems to the game that are completely brand new. I'm more interested in grabbing existing systems and merging them into something fresh, or at least have them interact in new and interesting ways. but we can iterate on those existing ones to give them a little bit more depth. Now, personally, I feel that the game has done quite a lot of focus on fleet combat and the mechanics behind it. So at this point, aside from some niche changes, like specializations on ships, like fleet support craft, etc., I think the game is functionally complete when it comes to fleet action as of Federations. Maybe stealth ships or anything sort of related to espionage would be nice, but at this point onwards, just a bunch of tweaking on the fleet combat system would pretty much be where I would leave it off. I would focus more deeply on the systems behind our empires and how they interact with each other. But for this particular one, we're going to be focusing more on internal mechanisms of our empire, because right now it's a little bit shallow. And that's something that we want to change, because we want to make sure that your empire is your empire. Something you have shaped throughout the eras, something that you have done choices with, and now you have to live with the consequences of those choices, whether or not they're good or bad. And that right there is something that I would focus on in this particular expansion, which I'm going to call Stellaris Empires. Now, where should we then start to design a new expansion? What right now is needed to be added to the game? Well, needed is a bit of a strong word, but it would be nice to have. So let's take a look at this list here that we have from the developers about things that they wanted to add. And notice the one item that I particularly like, which is called institutions. Now, according to this rather nebulous Wikipedia page regarding institutions, it gives examples of things like academia, economy, religion, industry, military, etc. Now, we're going to leave religion out of this for now, because that's something that we may want to do something with in the future. I find the idea of religion within Stellaris fascinating. A society based on spiritualism could be really cool, especially if you think about something like the Halo franchise, the Covenant, etc. And spiritualists do need a buff, but that's something that we're not trying to achieve here. The system would allow for building a base for religions to be part of this, but as I mentioned, it's not something that I'm particularly interested as of right now. So these institutions need a home, and what better place than expanding the size of the government screen and add them there as a sort of council of institutions. Now, if you've ever played the Crusader Kings 2 game, then you may have a vague idea of where we're going with this. Now, depending on what kind of type of base authority you pick, let's be honest here, aside from how long a character is in command of your empire, agendas, and naming, governments are fairly underdeveloped. So let's give the various basic government types more flavor by giving them different types of institutions that are led then by their own sub-leaders. As an example, on a top kind of level here, a democratic technocracy would have different types of institutions than a dictatorial autocracy. Every society is ruled in a different way, and their institutions should, in fact, reflect that. Let's give an example here. A dictatorial autocracy may have a stronger institution based around military, population control, secret police, etc. A democratic technocracy would have bonuses to academia or research fleets or researching experimental weapons, that sort of thing. There is really a lot of stuff that can be done with institutions when it comes to these sort of ideas. Every single empire with their own types of institutions, being able to flip them based on ethics would be rather nice. Another example, a megacorp focusing on mineral extraction, trade, external relations, etc. Now, these institutions by themselves could give more modifiers to your empires. They could be better at certain things, give more bonuses out for, say, mineral mining or output of technology or unity generation. The sky is really the limit here. Now, those would be the passive bonuses that they could have at the start of the game, because obviously you want to have passive bonuses for your institutions, otherwise you don't really interact with them. Relics are very similar in that regard. They have a passive bonus and they have an active bonus. There's a reason for you to go to the screen for relics to look at what they do and make a decision about what active effect you want to use. This is something that factions, for instance, don't do. They are very, very passive. You never go to that screen ever, because there's really no reason to, except for maybe managing your factions. We're going to throw those into the mix here as well, but we'll get to that shortly. Anyway, we want a interactive design here. Something that has both an active and a passive effect on your empire. First of all, we're going to take the agenda system or the mandate system or whatever applies to your empire and move them over to the institutions. Every institution gets themselves an agenda, something short-term to work on, say 10 to 20 years or something along those lines. This takes the agenda system, which has been completely orphaned and has been there at launch and not a lot of interesting stuff has happened to it, and merges it into here to make them more interesting. Sure, we'll need more agendas, but at least every institution could have a short-term thing they can go work towards and that you can actively work towards as well. Let's say, hey, right now we want the Miners Guild, for instance, right? The Miners Guild, it's a institution of your empire. They wanna do more mining. Cool. Agenda added. We can do a lot more than that. And let's say that we have three institutions and they all have their own agendas. And that right there would be the base game mechanical stuff behind it. Because it'd be kind of nice to merge these systems together, because right now they're all over the place. So let's just grab those and add them in. Secondly, long-term effects of institutions. An institution changes over time, at least in the real world, based on what the populace does and also how the institution shapes the world that we live in, or at least the country that we live in. Let's say, for instance, again, the academia, right? So what does the academia work on? Well, the academia can then work on to long-term projects. I love the idea of long-term projects, something that takes 100 years, 200 years, or something along those lines, a long-term goal. Personally, I would put megastructures in here, as you should be able to build a Dyson sphere from the start of the game, except that it should take like 200 years to build, because that would be a little bit more realistic, and that would be something that an institution could work on. But that's locked behind Utopia. It's not going to happen. It's based around, it's just the case of, we don't want to have people buy 2 expansions to get access to a feature here. So that's something that we would want to avoid. However, if you have Utopia, that may be an agenda then, or a midterm agenda that could be added at some point in time. Just an idea. But yeah, a fully realized event chain that can take 50 years, 100 years, 150 years to complete, with full-on mechanical stuff, random events being added. Hey, we're working on this project, and we want to do this. What direction should we go into? Should we focus on this type of weapons? Should we focus on new extraction mechanics? And based on around your decisions, negative or positive outcomes could happen. And then you, of course, have to deal with those issues as they come along. And, of course, it does then also impact the population. A negative outcome from an institution would impact the population losing trust in said institution. And then it may be, I don't know, be replaced with a different institution over time. Although right now, having replacement institutions would be a little bit iffy, as that would cause more problems than it would solve, really. But yeah, things that would make things a little bit more interesting, such as special technologies, weapons, structures, all coming out of institutions, and the passive bonuses and the active event bonuses that they give off would be really cool. I really would like to see more events based around internal actions rather than anomalies, something that you can actively work towards over a very long period of time, something that will keep you busy in the mid-game, because right now the mid-game, aside from the con and the L gates, there isn't a lot of stuff to do aside from development and going to war. So something that will keep you engaged and active and discover new events throughout. Now you can go completely nuts here, of course. You can add events You can add things that you can work towards whether or not you want to add budgets to this. Hey, do I want to spend an X amount of minerals or energy or strategic resources a month on an institution to make sure that whatever they're working on progresses quicker? You could add civics into the mix. Hey, I touched upon this earlier. Let's say the mining guild, it's a civic, it's a cornerstone of your society. It becomes an institution, but instead it doesn't give you a basic +1 mineral per miner bonus at the start of the game, but instead it gives you a series of event chains, one of which can give you that +1 mineral per miner. And the longer you work on it, the better the outcomes and the better the modifiers get in your game. Something for you to work towards, something for you to build up. You're building a house on these institutions. And with every single event, it's another floor on this house that you have built and made things more interesting. So what would be the thing here? Well, you could have around, say, 10 different basic institutions that can be shuffled around based on what ethics your empire has. Militarists get naval activity. You can throw some civics in there, say aristocracy, distinguished admiralty, miners guild, as I mentioned. They can have their own particular type of institution, which would make things interesting, and also civics a little bit more flexible, because instead of, oh, I want to have this bonus at the start of the game, you actually make a decision and you have to live with this decision for a long time until you can swap out the institution and do something else, and it has more impact on your game, because now you have to really think about, okay, I can get these event chains and these outcomes, but they're not guaranteed. However, that other one also has really cool ones, or something along those lines. I think that would be a really cool way of dealing with things. Now, an institution is only as strong as the supporting population of said institution. So let's make your decisions with your institution impact your economy and your population. If you are a pacifist and you are deciding to do weapons research, make them riot into the street. Let them lower their approval and subsequent influence income. You can do quite a lot of these things, and I'm really, really, really wanting for the faction system to be more interactive and events-based, rather than, oh, we have got these policies active and that is it. There's no interactions with factions that are interesting, let's put it that way. What else could you do? Fanatic Materialist Technocracy that is working on building robots. They'd be super happy about that. Militarists working on new fleets. That would increase the militarist faction's happiness. Xenophobes that you're not liking, that you're working on xeno crossbreeds for your armies. Yeah, that would lower their opinion of you and lower influence income. It's, again, the sky is really the limit here. Now, in the end, we've merged the ruler system, the agenda system, and the faction system into a new overall umbrella that is then the institutions, and we've really added flavor and personality to your empire, as well as having long-term consequences of your decisions be part of that. You should be able to look back into your modifier screen or events that pop out based on your decisions that you've made 100 years ago, whether or not it's positive or negative or not. You should really feel the impact of your decisions in the long run. Now, the real problem here is that this is incredibly content heavy, and content is something that can be difficult to produce when it comes to these type of scales. There's quite a lot of ethics in the game, there's quite a lot of civics in the game, and as well as the factions, of course, and they would all be influenced by this. The largest problem with this would be bandwidth in the content creation department, and that is specifically the scripters and the people that are actually creating the stories. There's only so many people you can add on a project and make sure that you get enough content. Whether or not the scope of an expansion like this is way too big is a bit of a question, because do you have enough people to write the events necessary for this? You're effectively writing anomalies for your empire, and that right there is something that I would be a little bit worried about, because you can only have so many people writing on events, and you would need at least 200, maybe even 300 events for a system like this to make it interesting and keep it up to date. And that is a lot of material that needs to be written. And that's basically the biggest issue here. Anyway, institutions, paid content, obviously, the events themselves, the patch introduces the system, as well as adding the agendas to the system to make sure that there is content there. You pay for the events. In the meantime, I want to thank Machinations.io for making this particular video possible. They are not sponsoring this video, I just wanted to throw it out there. They are a great little website that allows you to rapidly prototype any sort of game-related mechanical system, whether or not you want to do something with platformers or something similar to this. But yeah, they make it possible. Go and check it out at Machinations.io. Their website is extremely powerful and very useful if you're doing game design. In the meantime, though, thanks so much for watching. If you have any other feedback, feel free to pop it down below. I'm really looking forward to see what you think about this particular system, whether or not you feel it's viable, whether or not it has a place, or whether or not you think, hey, you're full of garbage, this is a much better way of doing it. Well, I'm looking forward to hear from you. Until next time, make sure that you subscribe, because, you know, that makes videos like this possible, and of course these here patrons that make things possible as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen and ladies, for putting that coin towards your Witcher. Until next time, take good care of yourselves, and as always, each other.